I sat at Queen's Park from 75 to 87. And that's 2 years longer than I said I was going to, because I said I would do it for 10 years, and I did it for 12. And it was a fascinating experience, and I wouldn't have missed it for the world. I'm not sure that I'd do it again, but I think knowing what I learned, I would do it again now.
Well, why did you decide to go into politics in the first place?
Well, I didn't decide at all. I had 6 children, 4 boys and 2 girls, and the day after I came back from Calgary, having done my swan song as the president of the Canadian Medical Association in Calgary, the doorbell rang, and I went, and it was Dalton Bales, who was the Minister of Community Affairs or something, I can't remember. At any rate, Municipal Affairs, that's right. At any rate, he's...
He had visited you, I think it was
no, wait a
4
minute.
times,
That was the
wasn't it?
first time he came, and he said, I said, why are you here? And he said, because I want you to consider running in my place when the election comes up this year. And I said, oh, Dalton, I know nothing about politics at all, except what I've learned in the Ministry of Labor. And he said, well, that's enough to know whether you want to do it or not. And I said, well, I honestly feel that I don't know enough, and so I'd have to say no. And he said, well, would you please think about it? So I said I would. So he came back 3 times after that, and each time I said no. He came back a 4th time after that, and it was on a Sunday afternoon, and the kids were all at home, and Stephen answered the door. And Steve knew Dalton very well because he'd been a sign manager for the last election that Dalton ran in. And he said, Pete, why are you here? And he said, well, hasn't she told you? And Steve said, told us what? And he said, well, I presume she'd talked to her husband. And and Stephen said, well, she hasn't talked to anybody that I know of. What's it about? So Dalton said, I've been trying to persuade her to run in my place because my cardiologist says I'll have another heart attack if I run again, and I don't want to die in office. And Stephen said, oh, is that what you're talking about? You want her to run in the election that's coming up, and you want in your place in York Mills? And Dalton said yes. So Steve said, tell you what, you go away. This was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And he said, we'll have a family conference and we'll discuss this and decide what she's going to do. And so Pete said he would do that, just that. And he left. And Steve and Alan came out to me and said, we're going to have a family conference. All the children are invited to be there, and I'm invited to be there, said he, but you're not. You will stay out here and get dinner ready for us. And I said, well, that's what I do on Sundays anyway. And he said, fine, do it this day as well. So I did. And at 4:15, they both came out, and Steve said, well, Mother, you're going to run. And so I said, I am? And he said, yes, you are. We've decided that it's the thing for you to do at this point, and we think you do a very good job. So we'd like you to do it. So I said, well, I guess if you think so, I better do it. So I did.
You graduated from high school at 16. Could you talk a bit about your time at the University of Toronto?
Well, it was a bit troublesome in the beginning because I won a scholarship in math and science, and therefore was admitted to that program at U of T, because there was a rule that you had to be 17 at least to be enrolled in medicine. And I stuck it out for about 3 weeks and decided I couldn't take it anymore. And without talking to my parents or anybody else, decided that I would go and talk to the dean of medicine and see what he had to say. So at any rate, I went to the office, talked to Miss Russell. She said, well, I can't do anything about that. You'll have to talk to the dean about it. And I said, how do I get to do that? And she said, well, you go to his office and sit there till he comes in and tell him that you want to speak to him. So I went down the hall to where his office was. It was at the opposite end of the hall in the medical building. And told the secretary there that I wanted to speak to the dean and that I would go sit down until he got there. And she said, well, he may be a while. And I said, fine. But so I sat and sat and sat. And after not too long, I think it was only about an hour, that he arrived, and he looked at me and he said, and what do you want, young lady? And I said, I want to talk to you, sir. And he said, all right, fine, come in and talk to me. So I went in into his office, and I sat down, and he said, what is it you want? And I said, I want to be admitted to medicine. And I said, they tell me I can't be because I'm not old enough. But I think I am old enough. And I've been to on house calls with our family doctor in Willowdale and have seen patients in their homes and have decided that that's exactly what I want to do. I decided at the age of 5 that I was going to be a doctor, and I have never wavered. I've stayed with it all the way through. And people thought I was crazy, but I kept saying, no, I'm going to be a doctor. But at any rate, he said, well, why do you think you should be in? And I said, well, my marks are decent, and I don't have any trouble studying, and I work hard. And he said, okay. He said, fine, I think we'll admit you. And he said, you come to at the lecture theater in the building here tomorrow. And I said, can't I go today? And he said, no, you go tomorrow. So I said, okay, I'll do that. So I went the next day and was admitted to medicine and started off, and it was perfect. The girls, there were 20 girls altogether, and that was more girls than they had ever admitted before. And the class was twice as big as any they'd ever had before. But they were doing that as an experiment because they admitted only people who were qualified academically to enter medicine, and they intended to cut them in half at the end of the first year, not wait till they got to the end of the clinical part of the program before releasing them. So at any rate, I started with that. And I started with a group of my first class in medicine was anatomy. And we had a cadaver. And I was given to a group of 5 girls who were supposed to be looking after this cadaver and dissecting it as prescribed in Grant's Book of Anatomy. And I got to be good friends with that group and had a great time. Enjoyed it thoroughly. I consider what I didn't do to be a more important part. I didn't run for the leadership. My team was all ready and prepared and organized to run for the leadership when Bill Davis stepped down. And they came finally to me and said, now what do you think? And I said, well, I have my friend Frank Miller and I have made a commitment to one another that if one runs, the other one won't. And I said, and I don't think he's going to run. So for weeks, it was apparent that he wasn't going to run until he suddenly one day came and said, I've decided to run. So I said, yeah, I think you should know that he has decided to run, therefore I can't. And so they were so annoyed. One of them actually left the party as a result of that, which was a shame, because I really didn't want that to happen. But I had made a commitment, and I had to keep that commitment.
Could you tell us the story of how you were named the first woman Minister of Labour in Canada?
When I was told by Miss Anderson, who was the Premier's Secretary, to be at the Park Plaza in Suite 128, or 828, at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I said, "What's he want to see me about?" She said, "I have no idea. He never tells me those details, but you be there. Now you better be there." So I said, "Okay, I'll be there." So I was there. And while I was sitting there waiting, because Bill was talking to someone else at that point, the door of the sitting area opened, and Lauren Henderson came in, and he looked at me and he said, "Who are you?" So I said, "I'm Bette Stephenson." And he said, "And what do you do?" And I said, "Well, up until yesterday I was a family physician." And he said, "And now I'm a member of the legislature." And he said, "Oh, well." And he said, "What did you do as a family physician?" And I said, "Looked after all kinds of people." Why? And he said, "Well, doctor, I've got this awful pain in my back." And I said, "Fine, just take off your clothes, lie down on the floor, and I'll be glad to examine you." His face went ashen, and he didn't say another word. He never, ever mentioned his back again to me. However, at that point, Bill called me into the next room and said, "I want you to do me a favor." And I said, "Well, what is it?" And he said, "I want you to be Minister of Labor." And I told him that the only thing I knew about labor was what women went through when they were having a baby. And he said, "Well, I think you've learned enough about other parts of political activity to make it worthwhile." And he said, "There are 3 reasons for it." He said, "The first reason is there's never been a woman Minister of Labor in Canada, and it's time there was." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "And the second reason is that I want to transfer responsibility for health and safety of workers from the Ministry of Health, where it has been, back to the Ministry of Labor, where it should be." And he said, "Your experience should be of help with that." And I said, "Yes, I think it might be." And he said, then he stopped for a minute or so. And I said, "And what was the third reason?" And he said, "Well, the third reason was that all my advisors have advised against it." And I said, "Yes, I'll do it." We established the Health and Safety Division within the Ministry of Labor, and that was important and is important now. In education, Bill 82 was the most, as far as I'm concerned, the most important thing we had done in all the time that I was in education. The third thing that I think was important was that I helped to establish the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research, which was Fraser Mustard's baby, but which I heard about. He came to me with it and said, "What do I do?" And I said, "I think we go and talk to the Premier." And he said, "Fine." So the 4 of us went. The president of the of the university, plus Fraser, plus me. What was I can't remember who the other one was, but there were 4 of us who went to see him and told him just how important I thought this was as far as Canada was concerned. And so at any rate, he agreed that it was and gave me some hints about things that I should look after. That is, not to let anybody know that Ontario was sponsoring it, ever, because all the other provinces would just reject whatever Ontario did simply because it happened to be more important than anybody else. And but I think that those are 3 of the major things. That Bill 82 was really important to me because I had one daughter who was learning disabled. She, with the proper training and teaching, became a teacher, became a high school principal, and retired last year. And she was so good. As minister of colleges and universities, I had to visit various institutions to announce what was happening as far as funding was concerned, which wasn't what they wanted to hear. And I went to Waterloo thinking that it would be a nice, peaceful place to make the first announcement. So I was standing at the podium talking my way through this announcement about this stricture on unlimited funds for universities. And as I was standing there, I was suddenly plastered with a lemon meringue pie all over my hair, my face, my neck, and my dress. And I didn't know what had hit me. And I looked, and this guy was disappearing around the edge of the students. And I asked for a towel and got it, wiped up what I could, and wiped off what I could, and continued, and finished the speech. And then the police came to me and said, "Now we've caught him. Do you want him charged?" And I said, "No, because if you do, you make a martyr of him. And if he's a martyr, he'll gain the notoriety he wants. And we don't want him to do that. So we just let him go and warn other people that's not something that you really should do. Smash the minister in the face with a lemon meringue pie." So the next day I had to go to York. And York, of course, was a hotbed of disdain, disturbance, and noise. And I thought this isn't going to be easy. So I was talking to my exec about having to go to York the next day. And he said, "Well, we'll think about something." So I came the next morning, and he said, "Have you got a favorite pie that you'd like to take?" And I said, "No, but I'd like one that's kind of mushy and slippery and messy when it's smashed into people." And I said, "A lemon meringue pie is just the right one for that." So he said, "Fine, we'll send out for a lemon meringue pie." So I went to York armed with a lemon meringue pie. And I stood up in front of them and said, "Now, if any of you are dreaming about having a repeat of yesterday's exercise," because it was the following day, just remember, you're warned right now. I've got a lemon meringue pie myself, and I will put it right in the face of anybody who tries to give me one. They were absolutely peaceful, quiet, attentive, and applauded when I got down, which was fine. Couldn't have happened any other way. It's just that I had considered my 12 years at Queen's Park to be one of the most fascinating learning experiences I've ever had in my life. It was marvelous. I enjoyed it thoroughly. I had a wonderful leader. Bill Davis was just a perfect guy. He was always willing to listen. Not always willing to act, but certainly willing to listen, which was great. And I had just a wonderful experience there. And I would recommend it to anybody who's interested. But you have to be willing to work and willing to take time to do the work that's necessary, not just do the work that is going to give you a showing in the newspapers or a picture magazine.